Yes. So today's key topic, of course, as everyone knows, it's mainly focused on small hospitals and how they are actually the way forward now in many areas, especially considering small towns or, of course, our big cities with a real shortage of space. So small hospitals should not be seen as a disadvantage. It provides everyone from the people setting it up to us wanting to design it a good challenge on how to plan it and make sure that it meets all requirements in that compact space. That way, it actually ensures there's very less wastage that happens. So everything you put into it is well thought of and well planned. The main thing we must consider when we plan a hospital, big or small actually, is the regulatory requirements, clinical needs like all the certification that we have, NABH, clinical establishment, your space utilization, and making sure that the planning is efficient. So when it comes to a small hospital, these four don't just become an aspect in it, it actually becomes the designing guideline for the hospital. Your local regulations is what will decide what the shape of your building will be. The clinical needs will decide how many beds you have in that facility. The space available will make you decide which department gets placed where, on which floor, what to keep next to each other. And of course, lean, something that is very clearly applied in this small building concept, is where you make sure the movement is minimalistic. Your staff has bare minimum space to, bare minimum distance to cover, and your patients or visitors entering your hospital also have bare minimum place to cover. So let's begin with your getting a good understanding of your local building norms. So this guidelines, there are 3-4 topics that come under local building laws, which is something anyone wanting to set up a hospital, even actually before you search for your site, before you even approach an architect or anything like that, these are certain information which you can very easily find out from your local municipality or the local area that has the building rules set in their area. So first, of course, they will let you know whether you need to get your approvals in that local, whether it's the panchayat covering it, whether it's the municipality covering it, or whether you have to go to the nearest big city. All that is determined by the size of your building. But what is the information that you can get from them that will help you select your specific plot and their location? First is, of course, the FSI. FSI is a certain number that is provided that will tell you how much you can build on that particular site. And this number can either be in the form of an index or it can be in the form of a ratio for the plot. So this particular, one second. Like for example, if you take Tamil Nadu, there are areas that specify that if it's a hospital being built in Tamil Nadu, a standard FSI number is 2. Of course, you can buy more, but let's first focus on what is anyway legally available for us to work with. So if you take the number 2, then that means if a site is of a certain area, then multiplied by 2 is how much you can build on the site. So for example, you have a 10,000 square feet site, how much you can build on it is 20,000 square feet. So that is a very critical factor that will even determine how big a site you want to buy. This same might be available in other states, like in the form of a ratio or in the form of a percentage. Each state to state, the way they depict that varies. So a key factor you can keep in mind when you know the number or the FSI of your particular plot is, now you want to set up a 50-bed hospital in any plot, you're out searching for a plot. So a 50-bed hospital automatically would mean you need at least 40 to 50,000 square feet of a building to house 50 beds. So assuming a 40,000 square feet building, automatically divided by 2 in Tamil Nadu, you'll need at least a 20,000 square feet plot to build a building for a 50-bed hospital. So that is a very simple math to go with and find out on your own without any assistance. Along with this, another factor they'll tell you is building coverage, which means the footprint of your building, how much of the plot it is allowed to cover. Either there won't be a limit like that, or there'll be certain states that specify only 50% of your plot can be covered by a solid structure, or only 40% of your plot, or some states even allow 60%, which is great. But the balance area will have to be left open to sky, no permanent structure built in it, and that way it has to be kept open. So this again determines, now if you've got 40,000, how much can I put on each floor and how many floors will this building have to go to? So always find out this value before you actually go and find your site. Or if you already have a site, use this value to determine how much you can build in it. You can't have a 10,000 square feet of a plot and then hope for a 100-bed facility. So it's good to, on your own, figure out this logic. The next factor that comes into play is the setback for the building. So when it's a small plot, understand again, your setback is another restriction that will make your building even smaller. So maybe one clear factor you should understand is small hospital doesn't mean a hospital planned in a tiny, tiny space. It means setting up 20-bed facilities, setting up 30-bed facilities instead of going for 100, 150, 300. Not necessary. You can survive very well with a 20-bed facility also. So back to the setback topic. Setback also is something that varies state to state. Some states have varying setbacks. So in front, there is one size. To the sides, it's another depth to be left. To the back, it's another depth. So all this is determined first by, of course, which state you're in. Like if it's Tamil Nadu again, I'm always using Tamil Nadu as the example because that's where we are mainly based. But Tamil Nadu again, it's 6 meter standard dimension on all sides. But if you go to other states like Kerala, they've got specific front will be a different depth, which will be more, sides will be less, back will be another thing. And that again is determined by the height of your building. How many floors are you going? That many. So many states in the north, it's height divided by a certain number, either height by 5 is your setback, those type of things. Then there are even places where it depends on the size of your plot. If it's a really deep plot, then the setback to be left is depth of the plot divided by a certain number, width of the plot divided by a certain number, but it is there. Every state has a setback requirement. So knowing your FSI gives you the overall area, but knowing your setback will give you the footprint. So that way you can automatically. So now again, I will go back to when you search for your site, don't look for, it may have an area of 50,000 square feet, 20,000 square feet. But if that plot is going to be 50 feet by whatever length, 100, 200, 300, then it's not very viable because then you can't function with a very narrow building. If you have a narrow building where only one OT can fit in the width of that building, then the whole purpose of that is lost. So always look for a site that is more square-like or more rectangle so that you have a decent proportion on either side so that your building is of a decent size after you leave the necessary setback. Then, of course, the whole purpose of setback is for your fire tender to move around the entire campus. That is the main reason. So think a little bit before you consider violating the setback also because it's for your own safety. It's for the fire engine to reach you, to rescue people on any floor they might be in. It is for a complete safety measure. Then the next thing you can find out over there is the height allowed in your building. Each state again, it varies. In Tamil Nadu, 18 meter is considered a non-high-rise building, but once you cross 18.3, you become a high-rise building. So that determines a lot of things. Like for example, when you're within the 18.3, it's only a 6 meter setback. But the minute you cross it, you go to 7 meter and then that could keep going higher. In other states like Kerala, with every added floor, the setback is going to increase. And then, of course, there is the overall National Building Code rule where they try to insist that keep 30 meter ideally as your maximum height. If you want, go to 45, but try to put non-patient areas in those floors. Then, of course, there are states that still give you leniency on that. You can go higher as long as you meet the required setback norms. But these, again, are factors that determine how much you build on that particular site. So find out from your local municipality what it is. Maybe if you're in a temple town, there might be an insistence that you should not be taller than the nearest temple tower. Or if you're very close to an airport, there will be a rule of the aviation rule on how tall your building can be. So every location specific, there are a whole set of rules which will even determine how much you can build on that site, what the shape of your building will be, everything. So when you're looking at a small plot, always consider all these because this is all the more critical. When it's a big plot, it doesn't matter actually how much setback you're leaving around your building. But when it's a small plot, every number counts, every space makes a difference. Then, of course, next comes adhering to your clinical standards, NABH, clinical establishment, and everything else that comes. There are IS standards for hospitals, there is your IPH standards, there are many rules. that come into. These two are very mandatory rules, and once you're past this, your next is anything extra you can provide, then it is always welcome. So the type of things these two rules mainly insist on are how safe your patients are, because that is their main focus. So then they will have certain requirements like mandatory departments. For example, every hospital has to have an emergency. If it's a small one, a big one, it does not matter. It needs to have an emergency so that in case someone who's just come there to consult you collapses over there, then you need to take care of, you need to have the capability of stabilizing that patient and then of course transport them to another hospital. You don't have to do the treatment right there, but you have to have the capability of stabilizing your patient. So those type of mandatory, of course, you have an OT, which means automatically you have to have an ICU. These are certain rules that they set because they are a little concerned that people may not always be able to meet those rules. So at least the bare minimum so that the patient is completely safe. Then, of course, infection control and zoning, which means in every area like your OT, ICUs, make sure you zone the space. OT, you'll have multiple barriers before you actually enter the OT. You put it in a public corridor, anyone can just walk in however they feel like. You have to zone it. You need your clean areas, your semi-sterile, sterile, and then reach your OT. And in these buffer areas is where you place your staff change rooms so that there's unidirection movement. You keep your pre-post-op beds in these areas. It's all buffer spaces before you reach the operation theater itself. And then, of course, the dirty corridor. Everywhere, all clinical establishment and NABH always advise that you put dirty corridor, mainly with the concept of how are you going to remove your unsterile items. Best solution so that there is no crossover is providing a dirty corridor behind your OT where you can pass it through a pass box and send the items. In case space becomes a constraint, you need to have a very good system in place such that the materials don't crisscross when they either you're bringing the clean items in or you're taking the dirty items out. You need a very good measure to meet the requirements. But otherwise, it is very important to have a good separate route to take your dirty items outside. Then, of course, all your fire norms where now it has become a lot more strict with the different fire accidents that have been happening throughout, and all these hospitals that have to be are forced to shut down because one fire ends up causing a huge damage. So now even NABH has become very particular that hospitals, even if it's a ground plus one, if you're over a certain area, you have to have sprinklers. And along with that, there are other rules of having your patient evacuation ramp. You need your fire detectors, smoke detectors, fire alarms, your escape routes provided in every building. And of course, as the building gets bigger, the rules get even more strict. They ask for fire lifts and other means of evacuation. So overall, fire has now become a very, very integral part of NABH. So now one thing to keep in mind, of course, when hospitals are being planned is consider that extra area. Always, you need your pathways to be clear. You need your route to escape to be easy and out. So when a tip we can give is that when you're planning the space, consider that there will be an excess of 20-25%, which is going to be plain circulation, just for the escape routes or for comfortable movement so that there is no blockage anywhere at any time. Similarly, Clinical Establishment Act also has a lot of rules like that, like NABH insists, a lot of zoning, clinical standards, everything. But other major rules that clinical establishment has is you have to be registered with them. State to state, this regulation, their smaller fine print rules vary state to state, but you have to be, as a clinical establishment, whether you're a clinic, a lab, a hospital, anything, you have to be registered in the Clinical Establishment Act. Then apart from that, they have small specifications, certain patient bed size, bed meaning the space occupied by that bed, space between beds. Those type of spaces, they've got certain specifications. And then for disabled friendly, providing the necessary toilets, providing drinking water points, they want you to go that extra mile. This is a non-negotiable thing also with them. You have to provide necessary waiting, at least the bare minimum that will be needed for the number of consulting rooms you have over there, the size of the pharmacy, the size of the inpatient rooms so that it's functional. It can be compact, but it has to be functional. Your doctor should be able to at least reach the patient on either side. We usually advise not to put a bed against a wall also, so that it's not too difficult. You never know if your doctor is right-handed or left-handed, or if the patient has an injury on which side. It's never known. So your patient should always be accessible. That is the whole purpose of providing all these rules and norms. Then other than that, they've got signage rules, which actually is there in NABH as well. So when you enter itself, you need to have your display clear. You need the doctors who are on call to be written over there, the departments that are there in that hospital, the basic signage of 24/7 emergency, or your pharmacy board, or your main entrance board. Everything they're very particular about, mainly just seeing the comfort of the patient who is entering your facility. Then we can go into planning itself. So till now it was the rules and regulations. Now putting that extra thought into planning out a space with the limited space that's available. So it's a good challenge to make sure that you plan a really smart facility inside. Consider the zoning of your facility, or meaning club all your high traffic areas together, club all the staff areas together, club all the IP related facilities separate, your clinical separate facilities separate. So for example, try to finish off your OPD and diagnostics in the ground or first floor itself. Keep your OTs totally secluded so that no one just roams around into that space. Keep OT and ICU close to each other so that there's good connectivity between them. It is all about where you place your facility. Now, the further away you place a very related facility, the longer distance they have to travel, the more they have to, more energy to expel, the more the lift is going to get occupied because there's constant movement between those floors. All those problems slowly come out after that. So you can actually compact your facility, maybe even survive with just one lift when you can do everything correctly so that the minimal use of that lift also happens. So that actually is an example why, for example, your lab, many assume that the collection area attached to the lab is the best place to locate it. True, for your lab staff, that is a very good place to locate. But consider giving a very tiny lab in the ground floor, which is already prime area. Already has your emergency, it has your diagnostics, it has your OPD, and now you're putting a lab also there. So you've got space constraint. You're forced to give a very tiny lab just because people will come there to give their samples. Instead, introduce a sample collection. Let there just be a sample collection with your OPD, and let your lab be on another totally secluded floor, which is only a staff only floor, if you would like, or a totally separate floor so that there is no OPD movement into that area. So it remains clean, it remains sterile, and your staff just needs to, at specific times during the day, just transport the materials from one floor to the other. Similarly, make use of your setback, make your parking areas, plan it such that you can use the setback area yet not block the driveway, at least a one-way driveway around your entire plot. You can make sure of that and then put your ambulance parking or your general parking over there. Place it in areas that are not advised for clinical use, for example, basement. Many states are very particular that don't put either flammable items or major patient going areas in your basement, which means automatically parking. That is the best solution. You have the basement, then future for you want to put a few storerooms there, a little overflow staff facilities go in there. That's also fine. But a basement is a very useful, expensive, but a useful space to provide in a hospital. Then, of course, comes planning. Now, of course, I first spoke about crowd control. So, classify based on staff areas, based on patient areas, high traffic areas, clinical areas. Now, among these, you need to make sure that they're planned well. So, take an emergency patient, for example. They are rushed into the emergency. Then, from the emergency, they have to be a clear-cut route for them to either go to the OT, depending on their situation. If it's a really critical case, they need a surgery which can't be handled in your emergency, straight up a lift that is there that can take them straight up to the OT or straight up to the ICU, one lift located very close to the emergency. Otherwise, you think of your OPD flow. All those visitors walking in, they need to finish all their requirements in that one place, ideally in that ground floor itself. Consultation, any minor scanning, ultrasound, treadmill, echo, anything like that in that floor, sample collection, all that happening in that one cluster. So that makes sure that a person enters into the OPD, they finish all their work within that small area itself, and they get out. So if you see this chart also, it's more about what needs to be as close to each other as possible. OT, in case you take a very small footprint for the building, it's a small hospital, of course, you'll have to plan it well. But you've chosen a very small site that has just met your setback requirements and created a small floor plate, which means just the OT with bare minimum, maybe your equipment store and staff change, that's all has fit in that flow. Then that is not ideally suitable. At least some sort of a pre-post stop has to be right there so that you can keep a patient there for observation at least for a few hours, so that in case some complication develops, you can quickly bring them back into the OT. But if you have to take them to another floor, then someone has to constantly keep watch on them to shift them when in case their situation is critical. Let the ICU be on another floor, never mind. But at least put the pre-post stop in the same floor as the OT itself. So again, which means your footprint gets bigger. So these are a lot of points when you plan itself that you need to ensure that it meets in every footprint. Then of course, your lean planning. Lean is all about optimum movement for either your staff or your patients. So if you take patients, for example, like how I explained earlier, your OPDs should be planned in a cluster. They just finish their movement there itself, diagnostic right there in that same floor, so that they can finish that also at the same time. If you look at your staff, plan it such that if you have a large floor plate with many inpatient rooms, don't just put one central nurse station. One thing, of course, is they may not get clear visibility. Second is they've got a long distance to keep running around. Instead, break it up. Make it two small nurse stations in two halves. Let both take care of just half the flow. It will reduce their movement. Keep their support facilities right there. So your med stores, your floor pantry, your clean utility, everything close to them so that they've got minimum movement to complete a task. So that is again energy saved, and that helps plan your department in the right size. No overflow, no excess. Everything built to the right size. And speaking of right size, the best way to put an overall picture to your building is, I'm sure Venkat will anyway go through it in his feasibility presentation as well, but have a plan in mind before you get into it. Plan of your departments. Just because you have a plot for a 50-bed hospital does not mean you need to build the 50 beds in on day one itself. Start small, start with 20 beds. Even our insurance empanelment also will be perfectly fine with 20 beds to begin with. Begin with the prime departments which you know are the need of that area. Begin with that and then gradually add a floor, add the new department, or expand sideways, add a new. So that way you have room to grow and you still don't spend as much in your first. Put in a lot of thought, put a lot of inputs and get the right result when you begin with. So when you plan spaces also, flexible spaces, that way put a few wards in the lower floors so that later it can become ICUs. Any such concept, it's good to put in play and always plan for the future. You have to have the ability to grow in your building. So leaving a floor for that or leaving a section of a department for that is always welcome for looking at the next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. Your hospital needs to survive. It has to go on for many years. So to sum it all up, to plan a compact building, it becomes even more important to consider every single aspect from regulations to clinical needs, space, etc. And you should all understand that the beauty in a hospital is not in its size, but it's in how well the space is planned within it and how functional and how happy your staff and your patients and visitors, all of them are inside that space. I hope I've given everyone a good understanding of how good it is and how fun it can be to plan a small hospital. So good luck to everyone when they decide to set up their own.